Alrighty, my friends, welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing a follow-up to Monday's video talking about the changes in market share that happened over the summer. Primarily how DC gained quite a bit, 9% and maybe even a little bit over. But instead of taking market share away from Marvel, which is the typical big two debate, they actually took the market share away from the small and mid-sized publishers, primarily Image, primarily IDW, and primarily Dark Horse. Image got the worst of it by far. And so that's fine for DC, but not so good for the smaller publishers. But now we have to look at the other side of the coin. Why is it that in this big battle of Marvel versus DC and all the other publishers are basically winding up as collateral damage, Marvel is basically stagnant? They didn't grow at all. In fact, they lost a tenth of a percentage point in their market share. So what's really going on at Marvel, and why is it that they can't seem to grow beyond where they are as the market leader when DC is somehow figuring out how to make themselves a bigger fish in the same pond? Let's talk about it. All right, welcome back to the channel. So if you haven't already, please like, share, subscribe. We'd appreciate it. That helps us grow within the ecosystem that is YouTube. So the reason we're talking about Marvel today is because, of course, DC is growing, but Marvel is not, even though technically speaking, from all accounts, Marvel is the market leader when it comes to sales. So what's happening there? Why isn't Marvel pulling ahead when they have all the money behind them, when they have the biggest presence when it comes to film, particularly through the MCU, and they have their pick of the litter when it comes to creative talent? Well, it's that last one that's the big problem. Most of their talent, and I would say almost all of their talent, and this applies for DC as well, is work for hire, which means they're not employees. Writers and artists are not employees of Marvel and DC. They are associated with Marvel and DC through work for hire contracts, which means you're brought in for a particular gig, and then when the gig is done, they either renew you for another gig, or they just pass you on and let you go about your merry way, and then you have to wait until a later time or try to find some work somewhere else. The big deal here is how Marvel is particularly manipulating the terms of the contracts in those work for hire deals to try and basically shaft the creators from getting the money that they're due. They want to keep all the money for themselves, and what they're doing then is they are souring the relationship between Marvel proper, which is the executives and all the editors, and the contractors who actually do the creative work. Now, I'm going to show you a couple statements. Some of them are several years old, but have proven to be true over and over again, where Marvel gets into a good faith work for hire contract with the creator does some good to great to even stellar work. That work is expanded upon beyond the comics into MCU films, into Disney Plus shows, and what have you. But then at the last minute, Marvel pulls a bait and switch and takes advantage of some loopholes that prevent that creator from getting paid for the work that they are due. So let's take a step back into a time machine, actually back about 4 years, and we're going to look at the comments made by several creators who are basically saying Marvel doesn't value their creators and they're shafting us for the work that we do, and how that now is resulting in a stagnant growth trajectory for Marvel, and which could spell much worse news for 2026. All right, we're going to start off with an article from The Guardian, which is a UK, EU, British-based newspaper online source. And the headline is exactly as you see it here. Marvel and DC face backlash over pay. They sent a thank you note and $5,000 to the creator of a character for a movie that made $1 billion. Now I'm going to skip through a lot of the prelude and preface stuff talking about what's going on here. But let's jump to some of the highlights from this article and some of the named creators, names that you should recognize if you are really a comics fan, at least the history of comics, and how those statements now have not only come to pass, but created an environment where the relationship between Marvel and the creators is pretty darn toxic. We're going to start off with Ed Brubaker. Now, if you know Ed Brubaker's work, legendary creator for Captain Marvel. He's also gone on to do his his personal owned work, primarily through Image, where you can get a lot of his stuff. You can find his indie created creations online through Amazon. He does phenomenal work. He is responsible for the creation of turning Bucky Barnes, who is the famous Captain America sidekick, into the Winter Soldier. That Winter Soldier character went on to be one of the prime antagonists in one of the best MCU films, Captain America, the Winter Soldier. When asked about his contribution to where that film eventually landed and how he was basically thanked for the work that he produced, this is his answer. For the most part, all Steve and I have got for creating the Winter Soldier and his storyline is a thanks, here or there, and over the years that's become harder and harder to live with. I have a great life as a writer, and much of it is because Cap and the Winter Soldier bringing so many readers to my other works. But I also can't deny feeling a bit sick to my stomach sometimes when my inbox fills up with people wanting comments on the show. When Marvel was asked, they declined to comment out of respect for Brubaker and Epting. Now you see these comments over and over again. You've seen them from Jim Starlin, who created Thanos. He basically got almost nothing. Roy Thomas, who contributed greatly to the current iteration of Loki, got almost nothing. And on and on and on and on. You can find a whole laundry list of creators here who are basically known creators, whose names you recognize, who are responsible for the creations of the characters that you now see on the big screen, and they got almost no money, barely a thank you, especially when some of these films have gone on to make $1 billion and more. And if you count in Blu-ray sales, if you count in action figures and all those ancillary ways that Marvel, and which is eventually owned by Disney, has made their money, they basically get nothing more than a few breadcrumbs and a handshake. Now you say, how can Marvel get away with that? How is it that they're creating all this property that's creating all this money, but the creators who are responsible for that work get pretty much nothing? Well, unfortunately, it comes down to contractual loopholes, which is kind of a skeezy way of saying that Marvel finds a way to get their lawyers involved, look at the work for hire contracts, and change the definition of things to match what the contract says to weasel out of money. At the heart of the problem Marvel and the creators they enlist to create this work is something called a special character contract. A special character contract says that when Marvel takes a character that a creator develops and they take that character into other mediums, like films, like animation, like Disney Plus shows, that the creator of that contract gets some amount of percentage of whatever money Marvel makes from the use of that character. So in other words, the creator is supposed to get a percentage, which sounds all well and good, right? That's fair. You sign up for the contract, you decide on the terms, and if the creator decides that that particular percentage is fair and just, they sign it, and then off you go. Here's the problem. You will have definitions for how the characters are used, and that will directly impact the level of the percentage. So for example, let's say a creator creates a new character, somebody from scratch. And if that character appears in a film as a major player, they'll get 25% of whatever ticket sales, whatever, merchandise sales, what have you. That's fine. And the creator says, wow, that's great. That's fantastic. But here's the problem. Marvel will say that character didn't appear in the film as a major character. They appeared in the film as a cameo role. And within the terms of the contract, that special character contract that creator has signed, a cameo role will be something like 10% or less. And so what's happened now is that the creator did the work, they provided it to Marvel, but Marvel kind of weasels in through the details of the contract to sort of, how should we say, cook the books a little bit about the definitions of what they signed. They'll say if you do a major character with a major supporting role, 25%. If it's cameo, it's less. Creator says that's fair. But even though for you, me, and everybody else with common sense and a sense of fair play and ethics will say, yeah, that wasn't a cameo, that was a major role, Marvel will say, no, that wasn't a major role, that was a cameo. So they find little weaselly ways to bring down the importance of that character, even though the character may be important in practice, but they bring it down in importance in the contractual sense so that they can pay the creators less. And that turns into a big headache for a creator that wants to turn out the best work. Marvel finds a way to get out of it so they don't have to pay so much. Now, what makes this situation worse is when that character is used, say it's in a film or some kind of world premiere on Disney Plus or some kind of space where it's beyond the comics, more often than not, Marvel will ask the creators, the people responsible for that character's development, to help promote the show, to help promote the film. They may even ask them to appear on the red carpet. But to add insult to injury, creators have to pay their own way half the time. So what's happening is not only are they not getting the money that they're due when it comes to promoting their work for the sake of keeping their name associated with the character, Marvel then will apply pressure. They'll say, we want to keep your name associated with the credits. We want to hype up your name, creator, as somebody who contributed to this work. But if you don't show up to the red carpet and you don't do the press tours, then we're not going to associate your name with what we've now developed. And so that's going to be a hit to your public persona, to your reputation, to your ability to say, hey, I made that. Well, if you're not going to help promote the work, we're not going to help promote you. So in a sense, Marvel is now applying double pressure. They're going to say, we're not going to pay you as much as we owe you because we're sort of doing some funny business with percentages. And if you don't come and promote the work, even on your own dime, which is primarily how that happens, you have to pay for the travel, you have to pay for the hotel, you have to show up at the event by renting your own car. If you don't do that, then we're not going to say, or we're not going to promote that you were associated with this work. So it's really pretty ugly stuff down the line. So let's look at another example of where this came into play. We talked about Ed Brubaker with the Winter Soldier, but how about Thanos? If you look at the first three phases of the MCU, Thanos was ultimately the main antagonist. He was the big bad. He was the big boss that eventually everybody had to fight to save the universe. Who created Thanos? Jim Starlin. Let's see what happened to Jim Starlin here in this article. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, noted Jim Starlin, who created Thanos. Starlin negotiated a bigger payout after he had to argue with Marvel that they had underpaid him for its use as the big bad of the MCU. Now, right off the bat, Thanos is a unique character. It's not like Batman or Superman or Spider-Man, where the people responsible for his creation aren't around anymore. Jim Starlin was front and center, the person who came up with the Thanos concept to begin with and built him into the comics. There would be no Thanos without Jim Starlin. That is an undeniable fact. And so if you sit there and you say, well, maybe he was just like one of those guys to create a piece. I mean, for example, Ed Brubaker didn't create Bucky Barnes, but he came up with the idea of converting Bucky Barnes into the Winter Soldier. And so you can maybe, in the outside realms of creativity when it comes to contract negotiation, kind of wiggle your way around it and say, well, you know, he didn't really come up with the Winter Soldier. Winter Soldier is just a derivative of Bucky Barnes, which he did not create. Well, that's a really, really big stretch, and you'd have to kind of argue a lot to kind of make that make sense. But in the Thanos case, there is no doubt. Jim Starlin created Thanos. There would be no Thanos without Jim Starlin. So for Jim Starlin to have to go back and argue and push and pull and fight and pull teeth to get recognition for his work, both financially and in terms of credit, there is no doubt that Marvel is definitely doing some funny business with its creators. The big problem here is how Marvel is basically playing funny business with the details and the fine print of those contracts and how quickly or not they're willing to enforce it and to go after it. So what's the solution? Do all the big name creators that have created the most impressive work so far just back off and say, no, you know what? I'm just not going to do that anymore. I'm just not going to work with Marvel. They can't be trusted. They're full of rats and snakes that will double cross you, backstab you, and not pay you what you owed. Well, to a certain degree, that is the right move from just a broad picture perspective, but that only goes so far. Marvel is still the market leader. They're still the leader when it comes to why people show up at the comic shop. If you say you're not going to go with Marvel, you're basically saying, I'm not going to associate myself with the top tier comic publisher, at least in North America. So that's not necessarily a practical way to do it. But unfortunately, that is kind of what's happening here, is now you see these top tier creators that just won't work with Marvel anymore. They've either gone on to do other things. Maybe they're doing storyboards for Hollywood. Maybe they're just going off to write their independent stuff. A lot of them have moved over to DC. So there's all kinds of things happening that have created a scenario now where, back to the original point, Marvel is now distanced themselves indirectly from top tier talent. Marvel is still the top publisher, but top tier talent doesn't want to work with them anymore. And so when we ask the original question, why is Marvel stagnant in their market share growth? It's simply that. They have created an ecosystem where people will just buy Marvel stuff out of habit, the so-called Marvel zombies. But they're not doing anything that's creating hype. They're not doing anything that's innovating or creating buzz or getting people excited. And they're not doing anything that's bringing on the next generation of reader, because the quality of talent that you need to make that possible won't touch Marvel anymore, because Marvel is proven to be untrustworthy. We look at why DC is growing in market share is because they're basically stealing away space from Image, IDW, and Dark Horse. But if you look at the other side of the coin from the big two, why is Marvel not growing? It's because they've scared away all the top tier talent, because they're doing funny business with money, they're doing funny business with credit, and they're doing funny business with basically treating top tier talent with a top tier relationship. And so, we look at this and say, okay, what are the solutions? How do we get out of this? What is the way forward to kind of make sure that we get to a place where Marvel can start growing again and resume its legitimate place as the top comic publisher going into 2026, instead of getting close to a cliff where it looks like they might fall off and DC has an opportunity to take over? Well, solution one, they can adopt the DC model. And what is the DC model? The DC model is DC uses standardized, published, and non-negotiable tiered bonus structure for their media adaptations. The structure defines thresholds, things like if you're in a film in a major role, if you're in a film in a cameo, or for a streaming series, whatever. It's a lot of the same ideas, but they've got to stop the ambiguity in the funny business about where the tiers lie and when a character falls into one tier versus the other. DC is much more rigid about that. Marvel is very loose about that. That's how they're able to get away from some of the funny business. Here's another example. The creator of Yelena Belova, who is the White Widow, who's played primarily by Florence Pugh in the MCU. That creator, Devin Grayson, he stated in an IGN report that the confusion and manipulation of the special contract amounted to a bait and switch. Grayson described that $25,000 promised sum, which would have been Yelena's appearance in some of the MCU properties, was whittled down to a flat $5,000 fee. Now, just having the character show up on the screen might mean something to somebody who is a fan of that character, which is great, but to the creator who made Yelena Belova, it's a slap in the face. Solution 2. What's the second way that they can fix this problem? Institute something called a legacy creator consulting pool. It's a pool of money that's a retainer for top tier creators. So this changes the relationship of work for hire. It's not quite the same thing, to a legacy partner. And this helps with ongoing appearances because it maintains expertise and goodwill for the creators who brought that character to life in the first place. That's priceless if you're trying to maintain quality and fan trust. So it's basically like, if you want to think of it this way, it's like tenure for college professors. Once you reach that level, everything that happens provides some level of security for that professor. And here's an example of where that works. So we talked about Roy Thomas, the legendary writer. He had to have his agent approach Marvel to get his name added to the credits for the Loki streaming service. When a foundational contributor to the Marvel Universe has to fight for credit on a show that's based on his work, the system's broken. It's off. And so if now Roy Thomas is included in this legacy creator consulting pool, he's covered, credit is guaranteed, money is flowing in the right direction for the right reasons, and he's good to go. So there's the problem. Marvel's stagnant market share growth is the consequence of that problem, and we have some ideas about how to fix it. But it's really up to Marvel, and we'll see how that goes for 2026. So the examples we've stated here are perfect use cases in kind of executives taking the short road. They're doing the quick cash grab, and they're not thinking about the long-term relationship with the creators that make the MCU and Disney Plus and everything associated with it possible. They're trying to pinch pennies, but they're driving the way creators that's going to keep Marvel running with new ideas and help them grow and expand their market share rather than staying completely flat. We're also now seeing that the creators are jumping ship. And until Marvel demonstrates respect for its creators, not just legal compliance down to the fine print, the entire media empire is a house built on sand. Eventually, it's going to collapse. My guess is 2026 is where we're going to start to see that collapse start to pick up speed and escalate. And personally for me, just because I'm a writer myself, the people who write and draw these stories, they deserve some dignity. Not given a cheap check that was handed off by some lawyer and basically treated as a second-class citizen because they were the people with the imagination and the ideas that brought this environment to life. They deserve more than a pat on the head from some pencil-pushing executive. It's not right and it's not fair. The future of Marvel's storytelling is directly tied to the financial fairness they are currently denying the creators who made the environment possible. That's the core of the problem. That's what needs to be fixed, and that's why Marvel will continue to remain stagnant and even start to slide, I suspect. Now, if you want to support the creators directly, I've linked Ed Brubaker's latest creator-owned work in the show notes description down below. So give that a click. If it seems like it's up your alley, go ahead and buy it, and I'm sure he would appreciate it. That supports his independence, and it shows the executives at Marvel that we prioritize what the creators are doing, and we respect and applaud the work that they're putting in. So I hope you found this video helpful. The format's a little bit different. We're trying some things out. But I'm looking forward to your comments on this. If Marvel is playing dirty with all its creators, what are your ideas for how they should fix that? Let me know down in the comments below. Now, go read comics, but read wisely. I'll see you next time for more comical opinions.